The courtroom fell silent as the judge called for order, his gavel striking the wood with a sharp sound that echoed in the tense room. All eyes were on Detective Jennifer Hayes, a seasoned officer with the police force, who was on the witness stand. She sat upright, her face as stiff as the uniform she wore, her eyes fixed firmly on the judge. But her thoughts were not focused on the truth. No, Detective Hayes had an agenda, and it had been brewing for weeks. Across from her, seated with a calm and quiet confidence, was Marcus Blackwell. He was dressed in a smart suit, his posture exuding a sense of authority. To anyone who didn't know better, Marcus was just a regular man caught in the crossfire of an unjust accusation. But the truth was far more complicated. Marcus wasn't just an ordinary man. He was a high-ranking CIA agent, with years of training and expertise that made him one of the most capable operatives in the country. And he wasn't here for some petty argument or mistake. No, he was here because of something much bigger. Something that had the potential to shake the very foundations of law and order. The tension in the air grew thicker as Detective Hayes prepared to give her testimony. The courtroom was packed with people, the media, the lawyers, and even some government officials who had been summoned for the case. But none of them knew what was about to unfold. "I saw him," Detective Hayes said, her voice cold and unwavering, "in the alley behind the convenience store. He was armed, dangerous, and clearly up to no good." Her words hung in the air, and the room seemed to hold its breath. But Marcus didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. He had been briefed on the lies she was about to tell. What he didn't know was that Detective Hayes was about to do something much worse than simply lie. She continued, "I confronted him, and he ran. I pursued him, and when I finally caught up with him, I had no choice but to defend myself. He threatened me with a weapon, and I had to use force." The prosecutor nodded, clearly pleased with the testimony. The defense attorney, on the other hand, was already scribbling notes furiously. They knew this wasn't true. Marcus had been nowhere near that alley. He wasn't even carrying a weapon when they met. He had been framed. But how could anyone prove it? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. He could feel his blood pressure rising as he listened to the detective spin her web of lies. He had been in the field for years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. He wasn't just fighting for his reputation. He was fighting for his life. And then, something happened that no one could have predicted. "I've heard enough," the judge said, his voice ringing out. "It's time for the defendant to speak." Marcus stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving Detective Hayes. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, and for a moment, he wondered if they knew the truth. But they didn't. Not yet. "My name is Marcus Blackwell," he began, his voice steady but with an undeniable edge. "And I am not the man you think I am." There was a murmur in the room, and Detective Hayes seemed to freeze. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, and for the briefest of moments, something almost imperceptible flashed across her face. Was it fear? Regret? Marcus couldn't tell, but it was enough to make him take a step closer to the truth. "I'm not some criminal lurking in the shadows," Marcus continued. "I'm a government agent, a member of the CIA, and I've been working undercover for years. What Detective Hayes is telling you is a lie, and I can prove it." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps filled the air as the weight of Marcus's words sank in. The judge looked stunned, the prosecutor's face turned white, and even the defense attorney seemed at a loss for words. But for Detective Hayes, it was a different story. She stood there, her expression betraying nothing, but Marcus could see the sweat starting to bead on her forehead. She hadn't expected this. And then, the shocker. Marcus pulled out his badge, the kind that only a few high-ranking officials in the CIA carried, and held it up for everyone to see. It gleamed in the courtroom light, its weight heavy with the promise of a deeper truth. "I'm not just anyone," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "And I won't let anyone destroy my life with lies. Not today. Not ever." Detective Hayes's face went pale. She could feel the walls closing in on her, and the weight of her own words seemed to crush her from all sides. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. And in that moment, Marcus realized he had won. But just as quickly, the fear returned, not for himself, but for what might come next. Before he could say another word, The judge slammed his gavel down again, calling for silence. "This is highly irregular," the judge muttered, but he wasn't looking at Marcus. His eyes were fixed on Detective Hayes, whose face had gone ashen. The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate anyone who stood still long enough. And then, as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath, the judge gave his ruling. "This case is dismissed for now." As Marcus made his way out of the courtroom, his heart pounded in his chest. He knew this was just the beginning. The lies had been exposed, but that didn't mean they were over. Hayes would fight back, and she would fight dirty. There was too much at stake for her to let this go. And somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. Someone who knew the real power behind Hayes' actions. Someone who had a hand in this, and who would stop at nothing to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was only just beginning. He had exposed one lie, but there were many more to come. The real enemy wasn't just Detective Hayes. It was the network of corruption that stretched deep into the heart of the system, and Marcus was about to find himself in the middle of it. But what he didn't know was that Detective Hayes had just made a phone call, and that phone call was going to change everything. The courtroom had barely emptied when Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, his fingers tightening around the device. It was a text message. "You have no idea what you've just started." He read it twice, his heart racing. The words were clear, but the meaning was anything but. And then the phone rang. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the heavy silence that had fallen over Marcus. He looked at the screen for a moment, his fingers hovering over the device. There was no name, just a string of numbers, a number he recognized but hadn't expected to hear from. It was encrypted, a communication line only used for urgent matters. With a deep breath, Marcus answered. "Marcus Blackwell," he said, his voice steady, masking the racing thoughts in his head. There was a brief pause on the other end before a voice spoke. One that Marcus knew all too well, but which he hadn't heard in years. It was deep, measured, and had a certain calm authority that sent a chill down his spine. "Marcus, it's Director Shaw," the voice said, a slight rasp in it. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, and you're about to find out how deep this goes." Marcus clenched his fist, his knuckles white. Director Shaw was one of the top figures in the CIA, someone who had overseen many of Marcus's assignments. He trusted Shaw, but this was different. This wasn't about missions anymore. This was personal. "Shaw, what the hell is going on?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice as composed as possible despite the fury building inside him. "What was that in the courtroom? I didn't think Hayes had the guts to pull something like that." There was a slight chuckle on the other end, but it lacked any real humor. "She didn't, Marcus. Not by herself. You've got someone else pulling her strings, and they're not going to stop with you. You've made yourself a target." A cold knot twisted in Marcus's stomach. He knew that in his line of work, secrets were as dangerous as weapons, and now he was caught in the middle of one that seemed bigger than anything he had ever faced before. "Who's behind it?" Marcus demanded. "And why the hell would they want to take me down?" "You'll find out soon enough," Shaw replied. "But for now, lay low. Keep your head down. We'll figure this out, but you need to be careful. Hayes isn't the only threat. You're up against people who have the power to make you disappear without a trace." Before Marcus could respond, the line went dead. He stared at his phone, now just a cold, silent object in his hand. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragmented conversation. Who would want to frame him? Why? And what was this network Shaw had hinted at? Marcus snapped back into reality when he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. He quickly pocketed his phone and looked around. The courtroom was mostly empty now, save for a few lingering reporters and security personnel. But one figure stood out, a tall, broad-shouldered man dressed in a black suit. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but his presence felt unmistakably menacing. Marcus's instincts kicked in. He turned and started walking toward the exit, his pace quickening. This wasn't the time to confront anyone. He needed answers. He needed to figure out who was behind this before it escalated any further. But the man in the suit was fast, too fast. As Marcus reached the exit, the man was already there, blocking his way. "Marcus Blackwell," the man said, his voice low but firm. We need to talk. Marcus's mind raced. Every alarm bell was ringing. He needed to stay calm. I don't know who you are, but you've got the wrong guy, he said, trying to buy himself some time. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. The man smiled, but it was a cold, empty smile. I don't think you have much of a choice in the matter, Mr. Blackwell. You've already made enemies who are much bigger than you realize. Before Marcus could react, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. He held it out, but Marcus didn't take it. Don't bother. I don't take gifts from strangers, Marcus said, his voice steady but his hand inching closer to his concealed weapon. The man's smile faded. You'll want to take this, he said, and you'll want to read it. It's from someone who has a vested interest in your future. Marcus hesitated, his mind working at full speed. Was this a trap? Or was this the lead he had been looking for? Finally, he reached out, taking the envelope with a firm grip. The man nodded once, his expression unreadable. You'll know what to do next. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the growing shadows of the building's hallway. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his fingers tight around the envelope. He looked at the wax seal on it, noting the unfamiliar insignia. It was a symbol he had never seen before, a symbol that filled him with an unsettling sense of dread. Opening the envelope, Marcus pulled out a single sheet of paper. The words were simple, but the message was chilling. Meet me at the old train station, 10 p.m. I'll explain everything. But be warned, trust no one. The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect, and it sent a wave of unease through Marcus. Who wrote this? And why the train station? It wasn't far from here, but it was a place he hadn't visited in years. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but there was no time to waste. He couldn't ignore this lead. He couldn't afford to. He tucked the note into his jacket pocket, turned, and headed for the door. As he stepped into the night air, the city lights shimmering around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His every move, every breath, was now a part of a larger game. And whoever was behind it had made it clear. There was no turning back. The evening air was thick with tension as Marcus made his way toward the old train station. The streets were quieter now, the last remnants of the day fading into the darkness. He kept his pace steady, though his mind raced with possibilities. Who was behind this cryptic message? And why choose the train station, a place that was mostly abandoned at night? The further he walked, the more he realized how isolated the area was. The train station had been out of use for years, and it showed. The windows were broken, graffiti covered the walls, and the rusting tracks seemed like a relic of a forgotten time. It wasn't a place people would visit unless they had a reason that could mean something dangerous. Marcus pulled his coat tighter around himself, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He was used to being hunted, used to the pressure of having enemies, but tonight was different. This wasn't about a mission, this was about survival. He had no idea who to trust, and he was already several steps behind whoever was orchestrating this. As he turned the corner, he saw the train station up ahead. The flickering streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, making the place feel even more desolate. He wasn't sure who he was supposed to meet, but his gut told him this was the right place. He moved quickly, slipping through the metal gates and onto the platform. His footsteps echoed in the eerie silence. There were no signs of life. No one was waiting. The only sound was the wind rustling through the broken windows. You're late. The voice was cold, almost mechanical, coming from the shadows near the ticket booth. Marcus's hand instinctively went to the small of his back where his weapon was holstered, but he stopped himself. No use rushing into a fight if you didn't need to. Who are you? Marcus demanded, his voice steady despite the rising adrenaline. And why the hell am I here? A figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall man with a sharp suit and a face that seemed oddly familiar. His eyes were cold, calculating, and he didn't speak for a moment, just studying Marcus as if weighing his every move. The man finally spoke. You're here because you're in over your head, Marcus. You've crossed paths with people who have a very specific interest in you. People who don't take kindly to being exposed. Marcus felt a jolt in his chest. Who the hell are you? He repeated, his voice hardening. I don't have time for cryptic answers. The man's lips twitched into a brief smile. My name is Victor Renner, and I'm not the one who's going to kill you, Marcus. I'm just here to make sure you understand what's at stake. Marcus took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. He'd never heard of anyone named Victor Renner, but the name had a certain weight to it, like it was attached to something important. You're not the one who's going to kill me? Marcus scoffed. Then why the hell am I talking to you? What's going on here? Renner's eyes glinted with something dark. Because, Marcus, you've just uncovered a much bigger operation than you realize. Detective Hayes, the lies she told in court, they're part of something much more dangerous, and it's not just about you anymore. There are bigger players involved, people who control things from the shadows. Marcus's heart began to pound. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed in such blunt terms made everything feel much more real. So, what? You expect me to sit back and let this go? To let them get away with it? Renner stepped closer, his voice lowering. No, Marcus. I expect you to listen. You've made enemies, yes, but you've also made some allies. The problem is, you have no idea who your real allies are. And that's what's going to get you killed. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to piece together Renner's words. This wasn't just about some rogue cop lying in court. This was much bigger. It was a conspiracy, one that stretched further than he could imagine. Before he could respond, Renner raised a hand, cutting him off. You don't have time to understand it all right now, but I can help you. If you want to live long enough to find out who's behind this, you need to work with me. Marcus's instinct screamed at him to walk away, to not trust this man. But something about Renner's presence, the cold confidence, the way he spoke, made Marcus pause. Maybe Renner wasn't a friend, but he might just be the only person who could help him navigate this mess. You've got 10 seconds to explain yourself, Marcus said, his voice low and tense. After that, I'm walking. Renner smiled slightly, almost as if he were expecting Marcus's resistance. You're smarter than I thought, he said. All right, I'll give you the short version. Detective Hayes was never supposed to be the one who targeted you. But when she started talking about your involvement in the case, she made a fatal mistake. She didn't know who you were, who you really are. And now, she's under their control. The same people who are pulling her strings are watching you, Marcus. And they don't make mistakes. The weight of Renner's words settled over Marcus like a lead blanket. He wanted to push back, to say that he could handle it, but deep down, he knew Renner was right. He had no idea who he was truly up against. And what about you, Renner? Marcus asked, trying to maintain his composure. What do you want from me? Renner's smile faltered, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Something real. I want the same thing you want, Marcus. To stay alive. And right now, we both need to watch our backs. Before Marcus could respond, a loud crash echoed through the station, followed by the sound of footsteps. Someone else was here, and they weren't friendly. Renner's face hardened. It's too late for talking. We need to move. Now. Without waiting for Marcus's response, Renner turned and bolted toward the darkened hallway leading to the old platform. Marcus hesitated for just a second, his mind racing. Then, adrenaline surged through him as he followed. Whoever was coming, they weren't here for a friendly chat. The sound of footsteps grew louder as Marcus and Renner sprinted down the dimly lit hallway. Every instinct in Marcus's body screamed that something was wrong, but he couldn't let himself stop and question it. Not now. Not with the danger so close. They reached the end of the hallway and turned a corner toward the platform. The old station was eerily quiet except for the pounding of their feet against the concrete floor. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. At first, Marcus couldn't make out the face, but as the figure stepped into the light, his heart skipped a beat. It was Detective Jennifer Hayes. What the hell are you doing here? Marcus snapped, his voice sharp. He was on edge, adrenaline pumping through him at full force. Renner didn't stop. He kept running, grabbing Marcus by the arm and yanking him forward. She's not the threat. Not anymore. Just keep moving. Marcus shot a look at Hayes, whose eyes flickered with uncertainty as she stepped forward, blocking their path. You're making a huge mistake, Marcus, she said, her voice shaking. but her stance still firm. You think you're the only one who knows what's going on? There's a lot more at stake here than you understand. Marcus halted for a moment, his mind racing. He had no idea if he should believe her, but something in her voice told him that she wasn't completely the enemy. She was involved in something deeper, something far more dangerous than he could comprehend. Move out of the way, Hayes, Renner ordered, his voice cold and unyielding. He didn't even look back to see if she was obeying. But Hayes didn't budge. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that only Marcus could hear. They know you're here. All of them. The people behind this. They know exactly where you are, and they'll stop at nothing to silence you, she said, her eyes darting nervously toward the door behind them. You've already made a mistake coming here. I told them you wouldn't listen. Now you're in danger. Marcus swallowed hard. Hayes wasn't a friend, but if she was telling the truth, then they were running out of time. He glanced at Renner, who was waiting for him, his eyes flashing with impatience. Do you trust her? Renner asked flatly, as if he already knew the answer. Marcus shook his head. I don't know. Renner didn't respond. He simply grabbed Marcus's arm again, more forcefully this time, and yanked him toward the old platform. The train station was starting to feel like a trap, and Marcus's unease was growing. They couldn't stay here for long. Suddenly, the sound of car tires screeching on the pavement echoed through the night, followed by a series of gunshots. Shit, Renner muttered under his breath. They found us. We don't have much time. Marcus could see the panic creeping into Hayes' eyes now. She looked around, as if searching for a way out, but it was clear she wasn't in control anymore. Whoever was hunting them had taken the reins. You need to come with us, Renner said quickly, looking at Marcus and then at Hayes. Now. Marcus hesitated for a moment, trying to make sense of everything. This was all spiraling out of control, faster than he could process. He had no idea who was after him, why they wanted him gone, or how deep this conspiracy went. But he did know one thing. He wasn't going to sit back and let whoever was after him win. Let's go, Marcus said to Renner, his voice sharp with resolve. They turned to run, but before they could take more than a few steps, the station door burst open. 3 armed men in dark suits stormed in, their guns raised. Stop right there, one of them yelled. Marcus's heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins. The men moved fast, but Renner was quicker. He pulled Marcus behind a pillar just as bullets flew, striking the walls with a deafening crack. Hayes dove for cover, taking refuge behind a nearby metal bench. The gunfire was relentless, echoing through the station, but Marcus didn't hesitate. His training kicked in. He reached for his own weapon, a small but powerful concealed handgun, and took aim. He couldn't see all of their attackers, but he knew they were closing in fast. The darkness worked in their favor, but also against them. Every second mattered. Renner, Marcus shouted over the gunfire. We need to take them down now. Renner didn't hesitate. He moved forward, crouching low and quickly firing at the closest attacker. The man dropped to the ground with a sharp cry, but there were still 2 more. Marcus didn't waste a moment. He fired as well, hitting one of the remaining men in the leg. The man went down, clutching his leg in agony. But the 3rd attacker was fast. He fired again, sending another round towards Marcus. It missed by inches, but Marcus wasn't about to wait for another shot. He dove behind the pillar, his heart hammering in his chest. Renner reloaded quickly, taking a strategic position behind another pillar. The remaining assailant approached cautiously, his gun aimed at Renner. Stay low, Renner whispered to Marcus, as they both repositioned themselves for a counterattack. Another series of shots rang out as Renner fired again, and this time, the 3rd man fell to the ground, motionless. Clear, Renner said, his voice calm, though Marcus could hear the edge of urgency in it. Marcus exhaled sharply, lowering his weapon. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't let himself be distracted by fear. They weren't out of the woods yet. Hayes slowly emerged from her hiding spot, glancing at the fallen men. She looked at Marcus, then at Renner. You know, this is only going to get worse, right? She said, her voice tinged with bitterness. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Where do we go from here? Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the shadows of the train station, still feeling the weight of every decision they'd made. Renner gave him a brief, sharp look. "We get out of here fast, and we make sure they know we're not going down without a fight." With that, Renner moved first, his steps quick and purposeful. Marcus followed closely, casting one last glance at Hayes before he ran after him. They weren't safe yet, but they had made it through the first hurdle. Whatever lay ahead, they would have to face it together, whether they liked it or not. And as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had just entered a much larger battle than he could have ever imagined. The streets outside the train station were a blur as Marcus, Renner, and Hayes sprinted toward the waiting car, its engine already running. The tension was thick, the weight of their narrow escape pressing down on them. The sirens were growing louder by the second, and they couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when they had barely started to piece together the puzzle. Renner reached the car first, opening the passenger door. "Get in, now!" he barked, his voice tight with urgency. Marcus didn't waste a second. He dove into the back seat, glancing over his shoulder at Hayes, who hesitated only for a moment before following him inside. The door slammed shut just as the first squad car turned the corner, its flashing lights illuminating the dark street. The car tore off, tires screeching as Renner floored the gas pedal. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked, his voice still laced with adrenaline. Renner's eyes were focused on the road ahead, his expression unreadable. "You'll find out soon enough." Marcus glanced at Hayes, who was sitting next to him, her face drawn and pale. She was clearly shaken, but there was something else in her eyes, something that seemed almost guilty. He couldn't figure out what it was, but he had more important things to focus on than her emotions. The bigger question was, what did she know? How far was she involved in all of this? The car weaved through the city streets, moving at breakneck speed, taking sharp turns and cutting through alleyways. Marcus's mind raced. Every moment they spent on the run brought them closer to the people who wanted him gone, but it also brought them closer to the truth. He could feel the pieces starting to fall into place, but they were still missing too many. Finally, Renner pulled the car into an underground parking garage. He stopped near a corner, the darkness of the garage swallowing the vehicle as the engine fell silent. "Get out," Renner said, his tone low and serious. Marcus climbed out first, scanning their surroundings. The garage was almost completely empty, save for a few parked cars in the back. It felt like a safe house, but Marcus wasn't ready to trust anything just yet. "Where are we?" Hayes asked, her voice hoarse. "Safe for now," Renner replied, "but not for long." They walked toward a stairwell at the far end of the garage. Marcus's senses were on high alert, his every step measured. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them, even in the supposed safety of this dimly lit parking garage. They ascended the stairs in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. At the top of the stairs, Renner swiped a card in a security system, and the door opened with a soft click. Inside, the room was small and sparse. Just a few chairs, a table, and a stack of files that looked like they'd been left in a hurry. There was a whiteboard on the wall, covered in hastily drawn lines and scribbles. Maps, names, and photos were pinned up, all connected by strings of red thread. It looked like the work of someone desperate to make sense of a chaotic situation. Renner gestured toward the table. "Sit. We need to talk." Marcus and Hayes sat across from each other, both of them eyeing Renner, waiting for him to explain what the hell was going on. "All right," Renner began, running a hand through his hair. "You both know that you're being hunted, but you have no idea by whom or why. Marcus, they want you gone because you've stumbled onto something they can't afford to have exposed. And Hayes, you're involved because they've got leverage on you. The moment you crossed them, you were marked." Marcus felt a cold chill creep down his spine. "Who are they?" Renner's eyes flicked over to the whiteboard, his face hardening. "A secret network. People in positions of power, high up in the government, corporations, and law enforcement. They've been operating in the shadows for years. They pull the strings, controlling everything from behind the scenes. Why would they target me?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but filled with confusion. "I'm not some big player. I'm just a CIA agent." Renner's lips curled into a bitter smile. That's exactly why they want you gone. You're not some cog in their machine, Marcus. You're a threat, a loose end. You've uncovered something they didn't want you to. And now, they'll stop at nothing to bury you. Marcus sat back, his mind reeling. It felt like he was stuck in the middle of a bad spy movie. Only this was real. The danger, the conspiracy, everything felt too surreal. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in her chair. But I didn't know. I didn't know what I was getting into. They told me that you were a liability, that you were going to blow everything wide open. I didn't have a choice. I had to play my part. Marcus turned to her, his eyes narrowing. What part? What did they make you do? Hayes hesitated, her gaze shifting to the floor. I planted the evidence. I framed you. It was supposed to be a simple job, just to make sure you'd be out of the picture for good. But I didn't realize how deep I was getting. I didn't know who was really behind it all. I was just a pawn. Renner let out a low sigh. She's telling the truth, Marcus. They've got a network that's too deep for anyone to just pull out of. Hayes was manipulated, just like everyone else they've got in their pocket. Marcus sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. His world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The lies, the deceit. It was all more than he could handle in one sitting. We need to act, Renner said, his voice breaking through Marcus's thoughts. The longer we sit here, the more time they have to come after us. We need to find out who's pulling the strings and take them down before they can silence us for good. Marcus nodded slowly. He had no idea what the next step was or how they were going to pull this off, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going down without a fight. He couldn't let them win, not after everything he'd sacrificed. All right, Marcus said, standing up from the table. What's our first move? Renner gave him a brief, calculating look. We start by finding out who's been giving orders to Detective Hayes. Someone high up has to be behind this, and I think I know exactly where we can start looking. Before Marcus could ask any more questions, Renner turned toward the map on the wall, his finger tracing a line that led to a single name. You've heard of him, Renner said, his voice low and steady. And he's the key to everything. Marcus followed Renner's finger to the name, and when he saw it, his heart skipped a beat. Director Shaw. Marcus felt the weight of the name hit him like a punch to the stomach. Director Shaw. The man who had once been his mentor, his superior, the one person he thought he could always trust. The same man who had trained him, watched his back, and gave him missions that were often dangerous but always for the greater good. But now, seeing Shaw's name pinned to the map, surrounded by strings of connections to people in the highest offices, it felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. Director Shaw? Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Renner didn't look up from the map. Yes, he's at the top of this mess. Or at least, he's deeply involved in it. Shaw's the one who controls a lot of the pieces. He's the key to everything. Marcus shook his head, disbelief flooding his system. No, that doesn't make sense. Shaw wouldn't. He wouldn't betray me. He wouldn't betray the agency. Renner turned to face him, his eyes dark and unflinching. He's not just betraying you, Marcus. He's part of a larger operation, one that's about to change the balance of power in this country. And if you don't stop him now, they'll erase everything you've worked for, everything you've believed in. Marcus clenched his fists, trying to process the shock. He had trusted Shaw with his life. Shaw had always been one of the good ones, a man who believed in justice and doing things by the book. Or at least, that's what Marcus had always thought. But now, Marcus was forced to face the cold, hard truth. Shaw was a part of something much darker, something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. You said Shaw's controlling things from the shadows, Marcus said, his voice tight. How do you know all this? Renner paused for a moment before answering, as though weighing how much to reveal. I've been tracking the operations of this network for a long time. Shaw's name kept coming up. I've had people in place, trying to gather intel on him. What I found wasn't just disturbing, it was damning. Shaw's involved in illegal arms deals, covert operations that go against everything the agency stands for. He's one of the masterminds behind a conspiracy to control global politics and wealth. Marcus's blood ran cold. The thought of Shaw, the man who had helped shape his career, Being at the center of such a web of corruption was incomprehensible. But Renner's words were clear. There was no denying it anymore. "So what's our next move?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse as he fought to regain control of his emotions. "We need to confront Shaw," Renner said, his gaze unwavering. "He's the one pulling the strings. Once we expose him, the whole operation will collapse. But we need to be careful. Shaw has too many resources, too many allies. If we rush in without a plan, we'll walk straight into a trap." Hayes, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke, her voice tinged with regret. "I know Shaw. I've worked with him. He's dangerous, Marcus. If you go after him, you'll be facing more than just one man. He has people everywhere. People who will do anything to protect him." Marcus nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He had been trained to think ahead, to anticipate moves before they were made. But this was different. Shaw wasn't just some rogue agent. He was a high-level player in a game Marcus didn't fully understand, and the stakes were much higher than anything he had ever faced. Renner continued, "We can't go directly to Shaw just yet. We need to weaken his network first. I have a few targets we can hit, key people who will give us the leverage we need. Once we have them, Shaw will have no choice but to come out of the shadows." "Who are these targets?" Marcus asked. Renner glanced at the map again, his finger moving to several names pinned around Shaw's. "These people are key players. They're the ones keeping Shaw's operation running. We take them down, one by one, and Shaw will be left exposed. First, we go after a couple of his most trusted associates, then we gather intel on his plans. We can use that to push him into a corner." Marcus was starting to feel the weight of the situation. They were in a race against time. The more they delayed, the stronger Shaw's grip would become. He had no choice. He had to do this, for his own survival, for the people who had trusted him, and for everyone else who might fall victim to Shaw's web. "Let's do it," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We don't have time to waste." Renner gave him a brief nod. "Good. We start tonight." The night sky was clear, but the air felt thick with anticipation as Marcus, Renner, and Hayes prepared to leave the hideout. They had gathered the intel they needed and were now on their way to their first target, a high-ranking official who had been working closely with Shaw. The plan was simple: get in, get the information, and get out. But in this world, simplicity was often a luxury they couldn't afford. As they approached the target's location, an upscale building in the heart of the city, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. This was a dangerous game they were playing, and each step they took brought them closer to Shaw and the dark truth he represented. Renner pulled the car into a hidden alley, far enough from the building to avoid detection, but close enough for them to move quickly. The tension in the car was palpable. Marcus could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, and though he had trained for moments like this, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Renner turned to them, his face hard. "We go in, we get the information, and we get out. Fast. No mistakes. This isn't a game." Marcus nodded. "Got it." Hayes gave a tight, anxious smile. "Let's just hope it goes as planned." As they exited the car and moved toward the building, Marcus's mind raced. This was it, the first step toward taking down Shaw and ending this nightmare. But deep down, he knew that the road ahead was going to be anything but easy. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, a voice whispered a question he couldn't ignore. What if they were already too late? The building loomed ahead, a modern skyscraper that seemed to pierce the sky with its sharp angles and gleaming windows. Despite its polished exterior, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to walk into a lion's den. The walls, the corridors, the security, everything about it screamed danger. But they had no choice. This was the first step toward taking Shaw down, and Marcus was determined to see it through. Renner led the way, his movements precise and confident. Hayes followed close behind, her steps cautious but steady. Marcus brought up the rear, his senses heightened, scanning the area around them for any sign of trouble. The city felt eerily quiet tonight, as if the calm before the storm was wrapping itself around them. They reached the entrance, a sleek, reinforced door with a high-tech security system. Renner didn't hesitate. He pulled out a small device, a high-tech lockpick that he'd used countless times before. With a few quick movements, the door clicked open. "Stay sharp," Renner muttered as they slipped inside. The lobby was empty, the only sound the faint hum of air conditioning. Marcus's eyes quickly darted to the security cameras overhead. There were 3 on the far wall, each positioned to capture any movement in the room. But Renner had already anticipated this. A few quiet clicks of his wristband, and the cameras went dark. "How many people are inside?" Marcus whispered, his gaze fixed on the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby. "Just one," Renner replied. "The target's on the top floor. He's supposed to be alone tonight, but I wouldn't bet on it. We need to move quickly." Without another word, they moved toward the elevator. Renner pressed the button for the top floor, and the doors slid open silently. The 3 of them stepped inside, the sound of the doors closing behind them feeling heavier than it should have. The ride up felt longer than it was. Each floor they passed by seemed to amplify the pressure on Marcus's chest. The hum of the elevator, the faint clinking of keys from Renner's belt, the soft shuffle of Hayes's boots. All of it felt louder than usual, as if their every move was echoing in the building. As the elevator finally reached the top floor, Marcus could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. The door opened with a soft ding, and the 3 of them stepped out into the hallway. They were met with silence, but Marcus could feel his instincts screaming at him to stay alert. Renner signaled for them to move. They walked briskly but quietly, their steps synchronized as they approached the target's office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, Marcus could see the faint glow of a desk lamp. The target was inside, working, or at least, that's what he thought. Renner motioned for them to halt. He took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the target, a man named Michael Pierce, one of Shaw's closest allies, sat at his desk, his back to the door. He was reviewing a stack of documents, oblivious to the 3 intruders in his building. Renner didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he crossed the room, closing the distance between himself and Pierce before the man had time to react. With a swift movement, Renner pressed a gun to Pierce's temple. "Don't move," Renner ordered, his voice icy and calm. Pierce froze, his eyes wide with shock. He slowly raised his hands in surrender, his gaze darting to Marcus and Hayes as they entered the room. "Who the hell are you people?" Pierce asked, his voice trembling with fear. "You've got the wrong man." "I don't know anything." Renner stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to tell us everything you know about Shaw and his operation. Every detail. Now." Pierce swallowed hard, his face pale. "I can't. If I talk, they'll kill me. They're watching me. They always are." Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady but forceful. "You don't have a choice. If you don't talk to us, you'll never see another day. Help us, and we'll get you out of this alive." Hayes moved to the side, watching Pierce closely. She didn't speak, but the tension in the room was clear. Everyone knew the stakes. Pierce hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke in a hushed whisper. "Shaw has eyes everywhere," Pierce said, his voice barely above a breath. "He's not just a government official. He controls half the black market operations in the country. Weapons, drugs, money laundering, and he's about to sell a massive shipment of weapons to a foreign government. That's what this is all about. He wants to start a war, but not just any war. A war that puts him in control of everything." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. A war? Shaw was orchestrating something much bigger than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just about power. This was about global domination. And the closer Marcus got to Shaw, the more he realized that stopping him wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a matter of preventing a catastrophe. Renner stepped back, his eyes hard. "How do we stop it? Where's Shaw's next move?" Pierce shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He clearly didn't want to say more, but he could feel the pressure mounting. "I don't know all the details, but I know he's planning to meet with his foreign buyers in 2 days. He's got the location set. A remote airstrip. That's where the deal is going down." Marcus's mind was already racing, piecing together the information. 2 days. They had 2 days to stop Shaw from triggering a global crisis. Renner's gaze flicked to Marcus. "We need to hit him before that meeting. If we take him out now, the deal's off the table." Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched. We can't let him make it to that airstrip. We stop him here and now. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the office, followed by the soft click of a door being unlocked. Marcus's eyes widened, realizing that they weren't alone. Renner looked at him, his face tightening with urgency. We've been compromised. They're here. The door slammed open, and Marcus barely had time to react. A group of armed men stormed into the office, guns raised. The trap had been set. The sudden rush of armed men into the office felt like time had slowed to a crawl. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, his instincts kicking in as his hand went to his weapon. But it was too late to make a move. The men were already in the doorway, their guns trained on the trio in the room. "Don't move," one of the men barked, his voice sharp with authority. Renner acted faster than Marcus could blink. He dropped to the floor, rolling to the side, his gun coming up in a fluid motion. A single shot rang out, striking the first man in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor. The man's weapon clattered out of his hand, but the others quickly recovered, opening fire. The room erupted into chaos. Bullets whizzed through the air, smashing into the walls and furniture. Marcus dove for cover behind a metal filing cabinet, his heart racing as he took stock of the situation. Renner was already returning fire, his shots precise and deadly. Hayes, meanwhile, had scrambled behind the desk, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Keep your head down," Renner yelled, popping up from behind cover and taking out another attacker. Marcus followed suit, leaning around the cabinet to get a better angle. He fired a few quick shots, hitting another of Shaw's men in the leg, causing him to drop to the floor in pain. But there were still more coming, more than Marcus had anticipated. Hayes glanced up from her cover, her face pale but determined. "We can't stay here. We need to get out." "Not yet," Marcus growled, his eyes scanning the room for a way out. "We've got information we need. We can't let them walk away with it." Renner's voice cut through the tension. "We don't have time to play this game. We get the intel, and we leave. Now." Marcus nodded, keeping his focus on the remaining attackers. "Hayes, grab the files," he shouted. Hayes hesitated only for a moment, then crawled across the floor toward the stack of papers Pierce had been working on. She grabbed the folder, clutching it tightly as she made her way back to Marcus's side. "Got it," Hayes shouted, holding up the folder as she slid behind the desk again. "Good," Marcus said, turning his attention back to the men in the room. "Now let's get out of here." Renner, still behind cover, shot another man in the chest, the attacker crumpling to the floor. But there were still two more remaining. The gunfire was relentless, and the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder. "We need an exit strategy," Marcus barked, looking at Renner. Renner's eyes flicked to the window across the room. "There's a fire escape outside. We take that, get to the roof, and we're out. But we need to move fast." Marcus nodded, already moving toward the window. As he ducked behind a desk for cover, he saw the fire escape ladder just outside, hanging low enough for them to climb. He turned to Hayes. "You first. Get to the window." Hayes didn't hesitate. She was already on her feet, darting to the side and throwing open the window with a swift motion. The sharp clang of the window echoed in the room, but they couldn't afford to care about being heard. She quickly scrambled out onto the fire escape, her hands gripping the metal rungs. Marcus followed close behind, his eyes scanning the room for any more threats. Renner was right behind him, keeping an eye on their rear. The gunfire continued from inside the office, but it was starting to slow down as their attackers were either neutralized or forced to retreat. Once on the fire escape, Marcus and Hayes started climbing quickly, adrenaline surging through their veins. Renner brought up the rear, keeping his head on a swivel, his eyes darting between the building and the street below. As they reached the roof, the sounds of sirens began to fill the air, signaling that the authorities were closing in. They didn't have much time. "Keep moving," Renner ordered, leading the way across the roof. "We'll head to the back. There's a van waiting for us." Marcus, breathless but focused, kept his eyes on their surroundings. He was acutely aware of the danger closing in, but they had a mission to finish. The information they had, Pierce's confession about Shaw's plans and the weapons deal, was too important to let fall into enemy hands. As they reached the edge of the roof, Marcus spotted the van parked in the alley below. Renner was already climbing down a ladder to the ground level, signaling for them to follow. Marcus and Hayes followed quickly, sliding down the ladder and onto the pavement just as the first police cars pulled up to the front of the building. The sound of sirens was deafening, but Renner's van was parked in a shadowed alley far enough away to escape immediate notice. They piled into the van, Renner slamming the door shut behind them. "Go, go!" Marcus shouted as Renner started the engine. The van lurched forward, speeding away from the building as the sound of sirens faded behind them. Marcus sat back, his mind still racing. He was relieved to have escaped, but he knew the fight was far from over. They had the intel they needed, but Shaw was still out there, and the clock was ticking. Every second they wasted brought them closer to a confrontation they weren't yet ready for. "We've got the information," Hayes said, her voice strained from the adrenaline. "Now what?" Renner glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes sharp. "Now we prepare. We get Shaw's plan in motion. We make sure the deal doesn't happen. And then, we go after him." Marcus nodded, a grim determination settling over him. He wasn't going to let Shaw destroy everything he had fought for. Not now. Not ever. But just as they drove through the quiet streets, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the message. It was from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake. Shaw is already ahead of you. You have one chance to stop him. Do what you must, but if you fail, everything is lost." The message was clear. The game had changed. Shaw wasn't just a step ahead. He was already planning his next move. And now, Marcus was running out of time. The words on Marcus's phone screen burned into his mind. "You've made a mistake. Shaw is already ahead of you. You have one chance to stop him. Do what you must, but if you fail, everything is lost." The weight of the message sank in, and Marcus's pulse quickened. Whoever had sent it knew something they didn't. Shaw was always one step ahead, but this felt different, like a warning, an ultimatum. It sent a chill down his spine. Renner glanced at Marcus from the driver's seat, his eyes narrowing as he saw the expression on his face. "What is it?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stared at the phone, replaying the words in his head. "Shaw's already planning his next move," he muttered. "He knows we're coming. And this?" He held up the phone. "This is someone warning us. Whoever it is, they're not on our side." Renner's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "We don't have time for mysteries. If Shaw's moving ahead, we need to stop him. Now." Marcus nodded, but the urgency gnawed at him. He had always been good at reading people, understanding motives, but this situation was different. They were up against someone who had orchestrated this whole thing from the shadows. Shaw was always in control, and now it seemed like even the pieces they thought they could trust were starting to move against them. Hayes, who had been unusually quiet since they left the building, spoke up from the back seat. "What's the next step? We have the intel, but it doesn't give us the whole picture. Where is this airstrip? And how do we stop the deal before it happens?" Renner glanced at Marcus again, his eyes hard and focused. "We head to the airstrip. It's our best chance to take down Shaw's operation before it goes public. The intel Pierce gave us is solid. We know where the weapons are going, who Shaw's meeting with, and when. If we hit them now, we can stop the deal, and Shaw won't be able to leverage that power." Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. They had to move fast, but the message on his phone gnawed at him, casting doubt in the back of his mind. Was Shaw really that far ahead? Or was this a trap, a way to get them to move recklessly? "Renner, can you get us there?" Marcus asked, trying to shake off the uncertainty. Renner nodded, eyes steely with resolve. "I've got the coordinates. We'll be there in an hour. But we're not going in blind. We'll need to make sure we have eyes on the ground before we move in. If Shaw's got anyone watching the perimeter, we need to know." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, focusing on the mission ahead. He trusted Renner's expertise, but there was still the feeling that they were missing something critical. "You said Shaw was planning this deal for weeks, right?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly quiet. "How can we be sure it's still going down tonight? What if he's already moved the deal?" Renner's expression didn't change. "I'm confident in the intel. Pierce's information was current. But if Shaw has changed his plans, we'll adapt. We have no other choice." Marcus nodded, though the doubt remained. He had to trust that this was their best shot. But the message lingered, taunting him with its implications. They were playing Shaw's game, and he had always been the master. The van rumbled down the road, cutting through the city streets. The sound of the engine was the only thing that seemed normal in a world that was quickly spiraling out of control. The plan was set. They'd infiltrate the airstrip, stop the deal, and hopefully take down Shaw in the process. As they neared the outskirts of the city, the landscape changed. The buildings thinned out, replaced by open fields and winding roads. The airstrip was located just outside the city limits, tucked away in a small industrial area. If they didn't move quickly, the deal would be underway, and they would lose their chance to stop Shaw's operation. Renner pulled the van into a secluded parking lot near the entrance to the airstrip. He cut the engine, and the van fell into silence, the tension in the air palpable. "Stay close," Renner said, his voice low. "We don't know how many people Shaw's brought with him. If we move in too fast, we'll draw attention." Marcus, Hayes, and Renner climbed out of the van, each of them ready for the mission ahead. Marcus checked his weapon, his mind sharpening as the adrenaline kicked in. This was it, the moment that could change everything. Renner pulled out a set of binoculars and scanned the area. "There's a small security team on the perimeter, but nothing too heavy. Looks like Shaw's taking this low-key. We can make it inside." "How many men do you think he has on site?" Marcus asked. Renner lowered the binoculars and turned to face him. "Maybe a dozen. If we time it right, we can slip in without being detected. But we'll need to move fast once we're inside." Marcus nodded. "Then let's move. We're running out of time." The team moved stealthily, sticking to the shadows as they approached the gates of the airstrip. The plan was simple: get in, disable any security, and make their way to the hangar where the deal was supposed to be taking place. Marcus could feel the weight of every decision, every step. There was no room for mistakes. As they crept closer to the hangar, Marcus's mind raced. They had the intel. They had the location. But what if Shaw was waiting for them? What if this was the trap? Renner signaled for them to stop, his hand raised in a silent command. They were just outside the hangar now, and Marcus's heart was hammering in his chest. The door to the hangar was slightly ajar, and Marcus could hear voices inside. Low, indistinct murmurs. Shaw was here, and the deal was going down. "Time to make our move," Renner whispered, as he moved toward the door. Marcus felt his muscles tense. They were on the edge of something big. This could be it, the chance to take Shaw down and stop the disaster before it started. But as he stepped forward, his phone buzzed again. This time, there was no message, just a single image. Marcus froze, staring at the photo on his screen. It was a picture of him, standing in front of the hangar, taken moments before. Marcus's blood ran cold as he stared at the photo on his phone. It was a picture of him, taken just moments before, standing outside the hangar. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. They had been set up. Someone knew exactly where they were. Shaw was waiting for them. "Renner, Hayes," Marcus whispered urgently, his voice low but filled with tension. "We've been compromised. Someone's been tracking us." Renner, who had been peeking inside the hangar, turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, compromised?" "They knew we were coming," Marcus said, his mind racing. "They took a picture of me outside the hangar. Shaw knew we were on our way." Renner's face twisted into a look of disbelief, but it quickly hardened with resolve. "Damn it. We've walked straight into his trap." Marcus's stomach twisted. They had no backup, no exit strategy, and now, the element of surprise was gone. They were surrounded, and Shaw had played them like pawns. "What do we do now?" Hayes asked, her voice shaky but still firm. She had been through a lot in the past days, but even she could feel the gravity of this moment. Marcus's eyes scanned the area, his mind working through every possible option. "We fight our way out, but we're not walking into that hangar. We need to find another way in. Something unexpected." Renner nodded, his face set in stone. "I'll cover the perimeter. You two get inside. We don't have much time." Without another word, Renner slipped into the shadows, his silhouette quickly vanishing into the darkness. Marcus and Hayes moved carefully toward the far side of the hangar, where a side door appeared to be less guarded. The danger was real now. They couldn't afford to underestimate Shaw, and if they didn't get to him first, there was no telling what he would do next. As they approached the side door, Marcus's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his stomach tightening. It was another message. You think you're clever, but you'll never reach me. You're already too late. Marcus's jaw clenched. Shaw was taunting him now, playing his game, pushing him to the limit. But Marcus wasn't going to be defeated. He had come too far. He wasn't going to let Shaw's lies, his manipulation, or his power break him. Get ready, Marcus whispered to Hayes as they reached the door. We're going in. He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the hangar was massive, dimly lit, and filled with crates and large machinery. The deal was underway. Marcus could see Shaw standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by a group of men in dark suits. The foreign buyers were there too, their faces masked by shadows. Shaw's cold eyes met Marcus's as he stepped into the hangar. The moment they locked eyes, Shaw's lips curled into a smirk, his demeanor confident, almost smug. I knew you'd come, Shaw said, his voice echoing across the room. But you're too late. Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved in fast, gun raised, his eyes locked on Shaw's. It's not over yet. Before Shaw could respond, a sharp crack of gunfire rang through the air. Marcus dove to the side, taking cover behind a stack of crates. Hayes followed suit, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. The room erupted into chaos as Shaw's men opened fire. They were outnumbered, but Marcus wasn't backing down. Stay close. Marcus shouted over the gunfire. We need to get to Shaw. He's the key. They moved quickly, using the crates for cover as they made their way across the hangar. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last. Shaw's men were everywhere, but Marcus wasn't going to let them stop him. Suddenly, Renner's voice crackled through the earpiece they had all been wearing. Marcus, we've got a problem. The exit's blocked. They've set up a trap. You need to finish this now. Marcus clenched his jaw. I know, he muttered. We're almost there. As they approached Shaw, the man remained eerily calm, a small, cold smile still on his lips. You think you can stop me? Shaw asked. You can't even trust the people closest to you. Marcus's eyes widened. Shaw knew. He knew about Hayes' betrayal. He had been playing them all along. You're wrong, Marcus said, his voice steady. This ends tonight. He fired 2 quick shots, taking out 2 of Shaw's men who were blocking their path. Hayes moved swiftly beside him, taking out another as they reached Shaw. Shaw's expression changed, his confidence faltering for the first time. You don't understand, he hissed. You're too late. The weapons are already on their way. The war has already begun. Marcus raised his gun, pointing it squarely at Shaw's chest. Not yet. You're not going anywhere. Shaw laughed, a dark, hollow sound. You think killing me will stop this? You'll never get to the buyers. They'll finish the job. For a split second, Marcus hesitated, but only for a split second. He had come this far. He had to finish what he started. With a steady hand, he fired. Shaw dropped to the ground, his body crumpling as the life drained from his eyes. The room fell into silence. Marcus stood there for a moment, staring at the man who had orchestrated everything, the man who had manipulated, betrayed, and destroyed countless lives. He was finally gone. But Marcus knew that this wasn't the end. Shaw may have been taken out, but the network he had built was still out there, still operating in the shadows. The war was far from over, and as long as people like Shaw existed, there would always be more battles to fight. Renner's voice came through the earpiece again. The buyers are gone. We've got them in custody. You did it, Marcus. Shaw's down. Marcus exhaled, lowering his weapon. Hayes stood beside him, her face a mix of exhaustion and relief. The mission was complete. The deal had been stopped, but the fight wasn't over. Let's get out of here, Marcus said, his voice low but determined. They moved toward the exit, leaving the chaos of the hangar behind them. The night was quiet, but the war was far from over. Marcus knew that he had won this battle, but the real fight was just beginning. And as he stepped out into the darkness, he knew one thing for certain. As long as there was breath in his lungs, he would keep fighting. For justice. For truth. and for everyone Shaw had hurt along the way.